Welcome everyone to our Bishop Arts Theater Center discussion on Curse of the Puerto Ricans with the wonderfully talented Rosa Fernandez, the playwright who wrote this amazing play running now at the Bishop Arts Theater Center. Before we get started on our discussion, I just want to do a few quick land acknowledgments. I currently am on the traditional lands of the Wichita people, and we know that simple acknowledgments, being where I am, is not enough to redress the wrongs that have come with genocide and displacement. However, we do hope that this will begin a discussion around the subject and that it's a vitally important subject, especially tying into the topic that we're going to be talking about right now with Curse of the Puerto Ricans. So, hello, Rosa. I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and let's get rocking and rolling talking about your wonderful play.
Yeah, so I am a theater artist that was born and raised in Brooklyn, but am currently based out of Buffalo, New York. And I do have a land acknowledgement, but I don't know it off the top of my head because there's so many nations represented here in New York State. It's actually really overwhelming. So thank you for starting with that.
Of course.
Um, and yeah, and I started writing because I was an actor originally. That was where my training was, and now um, I write for the things that I wanted to see on stage that weren't on stage. I write for the people that I want to see on stage that I didn't see represented on stage, and roles that I didn't see represented on stage for them. So that's why I do what I do.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, uh, one of the biggest things I know you said you started in the theater and you started writing. Do you have like a specific origin story or something that got you started, or the thing that inspired you to start making the roles that you don't necessarily see, or that even just got you started in theater in general?
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like for everyone, they know that moment where they decided to do theater. I know theater was my first love. I was one of those theater kids in high school, but I can't exactly remember the exact moment. And it's actually really funny because when I started getting into playwriting, my sister was like, "You've always been telling stories since we were kids. You've always been telling stories." Um, and that was like, I mean, talk about lack of self-awareness. That my sister had to be the one to be like, you're real, like you've been always been doing this. This is what you love.
Right.
Um, so I can't really, unfortunately, I don't have a very good origin story, but I know that specifically with this play being the first play that I completed,
Okay.
um, I wanted to tell a story that I think is fairly common in the theater sphere, right? We see a lot of these like living room dramas, it takes
Right.
place in one room and uh we wrap it up as nicely as we can by the end of the 90 to 2 hours, right? But I wanted it from a Latinx perspective.
Right.
And I wrote what I knew at the time, which was Latinx families, and there's a lot of my husband's family in this, there's a lot of my family, there's a lot of like other people's families in this, and yeah, so that's kind of why where I sort of started, and because I think you need to sort of abide by the rules and learn the rules really well so you can break them.
Right. Right. Of
And
course.
so yeah, so I think that's where I'm heading in my career right now is like, okay, I did the things that I know. I did the formats that I understand. Now I'm gonna figure out what comes next and how can I break the rules. So
Right. 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 So, in approaching the storyline of course, the Puerto Ricans, you said that this is a story that we see a whole lot, but from a Latinx perspective, and I think that's really important to touch in on. What do you see are the sort of differences that come with telling something from a different perspective than, say, something that would exist in the standard Western canon, the Eurocentric canon of American theater? If you wouldn't mind elucidating on that.
yeah, so it's really that's a really good question because I one of the things that it's always interesting to see the perspective of non-Latinx audiences on Curse of the Puerto Ricans because a lot of times when they talk specifically about the character Milagros, it's always like, oh, she's awful, oh, she's this, she's that, and like Latinos are like, that's just that she's just a mom. You know what I mean? Latinos are like, no, she's not, she's just my mom, and
Right.
and like so I think the perception of what toxicity, what manipulation, what
Hmm.
that looks like in
Right.
different cultures is always going to be different, right? So
Right.
you see a story like August Osage County. I think we can all agree the mom was toxic. We can
Hmm.
all agree the mom, what wasn't a very nice person, right?
Hmm.
And that sort of united everyone in watching that play. But it's really interesting to me. I think I'm pushing up against the cultural norms of Latinx people when they
Hmm.
see this play because they're like, no, no, no. They're hearing other people talk about their mom, and they're like, no, my mom is a good person. She's just been through a lot, and she just,
Right. 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 Of
So
course,
yeah, I think
as all our mothers
I'm
do.
pushing up on the culture.
Of course, of course. And in pushing up on the culture, I think it's really important. One of the biggest things that I know there's a lot of questions surrounding many people who say, who has the right to tell what story, from what perspective can you approach, and you discussing pushing up against the culture. What have you found to be some of the results of pushing up against the culture? I know
Yeah.
there are people even within our own community that discuss, what is the relevancy or the place of Lin-Manuel Miranda, what kind of choices are being made, and that's with all of our artists. It's not just Lin-Manuel. It's every single one of us. We're never the perfect Latino, Latina playwright. What have you found has come with the kinds of questioning and the pushing against the norms and the cultural kind of heritage of Latinidad?
Yeah. That's such a great question. Thank you for asking it. And I want to start with the conversation around, yeah, like who has the right to tell it, right?
Yeah.
Because I actually really struggle with my relationship with this play
Uh huh.
because I see myself so much in this play, but I'm actually not Puerto Rican.
Mm.
So yeah, and I want to talk about that because
Right.
I think it's really an important story to tell. So I am first generation. My mom was Peruvian, my father's Cuban.
Okay.
Um, I did grow up in Brooklyn, so I grew up with a lot of Puerto Ricans. I went to school in an
Right.
entirely Puerto Rican church. I
Right.
went, I married a Puerto Rican man. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so my relationship in the last 3 years has changed with this play because of my anti-racism journey and just talking about do I have the right to tell this story that's very culturally specific, right?
Right.
And I think what people don't realize about Latinidad in general is that we are not a monolith. We are not
Right.
all the same.
Right.
Our experiences are not the same.
Right.
Our experiences with immigrating to the United States and living in the United States is not the same. I
Right.
have cousins who are undocumented, and that's a
Right.
completely different story than someone who was born here.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that it's the Peter Parker with great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
And I'm finding myself in the middle of that and trying to maneuver that with great responsibility and sort
Right.
of thinking moving forward, is this something that I take out of the repertoire of like plays that I make available? Or do I collaborate with a Puerto Rican writer to ensure that every time this play gets produced, someone is getting money from it
Right.
that is actually of Puerto Rican descent? So
Right.
these are all things that I'm trying to maneuver with responsibility,
Right.
with humility, because I'm not perfect. And I think that in the year 2022, I wouldn't write a play like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also being honest, I don't regret that I wrote it because
Right.
it helped me get to where I am as an artist, as a person. Um, and I think it's important too in our own journey, especially with anti-racism, to take responsibility in that and
Mm-hmm.
to not beat ourselves up forever about it, but to also say like I'm learning and I know better now, so I do better now, right? Like the
Right.
Maya
Right.
Angelou thing, so if you
Right.
know better, you do better. And that's what I'm
Right.
trying to do. I know more now and I'm like trying to do better.
Right.
But I'm so grateful. I love the collaboration with Bishop Arts because the conversation with Teresa was always like, who should direct this? And I think Doctora Marta Maria Torres was the right choice. I just love her. I think she brought so much of the culture. She brought so much of the parts that I could never bring to this.
Right. Right.
And I
It,
and I love that.
absolutely, and it is such an interesting topic, though, especially when dealing with something like Latinidad, is because I think all Latino people know we're not a monolith, and yet we operate under a system, particularly in the entertainment industry, that we are monolith essentially, and we have people that are not necessarily Puerto Rican, who are writing Puerto Rican stories or who are paid in the television and film industry. I can't tell you how many times I've been up for roles to write about Mexican Americans despite being Colombian. Or the assumption that I may know about Day of the Dead, even though that is not something at all
No,
that is culturally me. So it is something of a very interesting thing to operate in a space, in an industry that we know we're not a monolith, and yet the only job roles that really come available for us are if we turn into this kind of monolith that they put us as. I know there was a giant conversation about whether or not Javier Bardem should have been playing Ricky Ricardo, and it is a question.
yeah,
It's a legit question that we all have to grapple with, or even how the people in Narcos was cast. That is. I think there's everything except for Colombians in the show about Colombian
that's but
drug dealers.
but that's like since we've been making and especially with Latinidad, like Latinos are one of the biggest consumers of media, and we're the most underrepresented in
Yeah,
said media.
yeah,
We're the most underrepresented group, but we're one of the biggest consumers of said media. I always use the example of like my husband is really into video games, and you know, there's not a ton of Latino characters that I can think of off the top of my head,
right,
in video games as a whole. And that, I mean, that's throughout any
right,
type of media that you see. And and I'll take it a step further, because this is something that I'm very conscious of as an indigenous Latina woman. Um, Colorism is a huge problem in Latinidad, throughout Latinidad,
right,
and
right,
not seeing our own people or diminishing their participation in our culture because they're either they're indigenous looking or they're dark skinned, right? Like
right,
that's I feel like that's something a conversation that needs to be had in the specifically in the Latino community.
right,
And it
right,
was something, it's a lens that I really really take into the work that I write, because Latinidad doesn't just look like, Univision where
right,
everybody's white passing and,
right,
that's not Latinidad. Sorry, that's not it.
right, right, right.
What's beautiful about being Latinx is that we come in all colors, shapes, sizes, and it's a very diverse pool.
Right,
And I think that unfortunately in Hollywood we don't embrace that.
right,
I don't think we embrace it in theater either. I'll say it.
right,
I don't think we embrace it in theater. A lot of times when the people that are getting cast are people who are white passing.
right,
And I think that that's a real problem that we need to talk about within our community. And there needs to be healing that happens within our community, but also in the grand scheme of how we create art and how we
right,
underrepresent specific groups and the harm that that does.
right. Of course, absolutely, I agree completely. Now, going back a little bit, you had mentioned the director, Dr. Marta, and the kind of level of cultural awareness, competency, and understanding of Puerto Rican culture, being herself Puerto Riqueña. What do you feel directors bring, and how important is it that they actually have the kind of background necessary to be able to direct these plays, or to give a sort of depth to it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important. I myself have been an actor in a play surrounding Latinx characters directed by a white man, where he made full on eye contact with me and was like, "Your character doesn't have a struggle." And this was Water by the Spoonful,
Right, right,
where identity and moving through a primarily white world as a
right,
Latina woman, as an educated Latina woman, is
right,
something that I don't think a lot of people understand. And
right,
especially not a white man is not going to understand it.
right, right,
And I had to advocate for myself, and I had to say, excuse me. Actually, she does have a struggle. And actually, I really relate to that struggle. I really relate to the code switching and the
right,
um, being perceived as a certain way just because I exist, not even because I'm putting that out there in the world, right?
right,
Okay, the amount of times that I've been called a spicy Latina, and I'm like, I'm spicy, I didn't know that. uh,
right,
just the labels that the people really, I think it's a comfort thing. People want to be able to stick you in a box
right, right,
and to say, okay, this is where you go, and you stay in
Mm-hmm.
that box, right? And yeah, I think that that's a really, really important discussion to have. But that being said, there's even more specific parts of it. I think that for me, I'm just coming to terms with that, right? I wrote a play about a haunted house, and there's Santeria, there's
Right.
Espiritismo in that play,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's a certain level of respect that the director has to have in order to bring that message across. You
Right.
can't look at it as oh, that's evil, or oh, that there's a
Right.
lot of cultural relevance
Right.
that when we're looking at Santeria, we're looking at Espiritismo through an American lens and
Right.
through specifically a white lens. There's a lot of respect that gets lost in the conversation,
Right. Right. Of course. Of course.
or there's fear has entered the chat, right? Like,
Right. Right.
that's my culture.
Right, right. It is one of those very interesting things to see happen, the cultural conversations that we are trying to have, and yet the theater still remains, in terms of its audience buildup and makeup, very white
Yeah.
skewing, or very
Oh
white
yeah.
leaning, especially older white. How have you, as a playwright, found that navigation of being able to remain culturally true to your vision and your aesthetic, while also knowing that much of it is going to be passing through the white gaze or through the white lens, or be consumed by primarily white audiences? I'd love to get your insight into that.
It's tough. I have a lot of feelings about it. It's tough because you do know in the back of your head it is going to with Curse of the Puerto Ricans, it has been very, very from the beginning. It's been a nice experience because actually a lot of people come up to me afterwards and they're like, I saw my family on the
Mm-hmm.
stage. I had
Right.
this older Polish man be like, this is my family. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
is exactly like what my family's like.
Mm-hmm.
I saw them on stage. So that's really lovely that they can, take that on and say, "Ooh, I'm relating." I think it helps with the empathy
Right.
part of it. I think
Right.
that's why theater is so important. It does help us with our empathy. It helps us be more empathetic to experiences that are not our own.
Right.
That being said, especially with like a play like A Skeptic and a Bruja, I think it's very. I lived for those nights where we had Latinos in the audience, and they would
Right.
come up to me and they would be like, I saw myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even there for this. Like I was really good friends with the people during the run with the actors, and they would send me messages being like, we just had a student come to see it tonight, and they were
Mm-hmm.
like, this play is my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
and the effect that it has on the people you wrote it for.
Right.
It's another night at theater for a white audience member.
Right.
But for the community that you write it for, it's something that's life changing. It's
Yeah.
representation. It's seeing themselves in a space that they've never seen themselves before, and that's
Yeah.
why I do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely see where you're coming from there. I've always likened being a playwright to putting a message in a bottle and throwing it out at sea, hoping that hopefully someone out there finds it and is able to respond or relate to whatever it is that you put into that bottle. And it really does feel like that sometimes, especially when you're writing as a person of color. Knowing primarily that the people that you most desperately want to see the thing are not going to primarily see it, or they're not going to be at least the first consumers of it.
Right.
Yeah, it's such an interesting maneuvering. With regards to, I know we've talked a lot about how we are very unique. We're not necessarily a monolith, but one of our big cultural touchstones that you touched on earlier was our dear toxic parents, and working through the toxicity that our parents have either put into our lives, or have given us, or have made us maneuver with. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about parenthood and how that comes into play, especially with a play like Curse of the Puerto Ricans, and how working through that is an interesting thing, particularly for Latinos, where our entire default is the culture of silence. We don't talk about this. I mean, we have a whole song in Encanto. We don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about the things. We don't talk
It's
about these
true.
things. So, like, what's it like putting things like this out there? If you don't mind my asking.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think it affects people differently. Some people are like, oof, like they just start weeping because they feel so seen.
Right.
And then it was so funny. I was telling Teresa about like I saw a preview of Curse of the Puerto Ricans, and there was this woman in the front row who was very adamant about telling me that this was not her experience. And why
Mm.
did I write this play? It's like, we touched on something. Someone's going to trigger.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was very aggressive, and we were like, oh, okay, like this is coming from somewhere.
Yes.
And then we made the joke from that if you can identify the milagros in your friend group, you might be milagros.
Right.
um,
Right.
but just speaking from my own experience, that's something that I'm very, very much grappling with right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Trying to break generational curses is really hard.
Right.
You have to you got to do something revolutionary and like throw a grenade and really, really mix things up, like, in order to get the conversation started. So it's so funny. I wrote a play where the dad is largely absent through the entire play.
Right.
But you feel his presence.
Right. Right.
And I think that that has very much been my experience with my father. I had a very fraught relationship. He was basically non-existent for me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's something that was very fraught later in life when I
Right.
reconnected with him. And then I was recently not on speaking terms with my mom, and am finally coming to this place where, as my friend phrased it, because he's on a very similar experience for me, I don't feel like I can cut her off.
Right.
It feels almost like cutting a piece of my body off,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I have to treat her with that sort of happy indifference that you treat a toddler, of like, I have to just say, this, you're on your own journey, and you might not learn this lesson today, and you might not learn it for the next 18 years, and
Right.
you might never learn it. When you're talking about your parents, you might never learn it,
Right.
but
Right.
you have to sort of approach it in a different way and manage it in a different way while respecting your boundaries. It's not about saying yes to everything and saying, okay, you get to do this to me, you get to treat me, you get to mistreat me, and I got to deal with it.
Right.
And that's why I love the definition of boundaries, where it's like boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me at the same time.
Right. Right. It's really, I hear you completely. I hear you, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask, how then do you deal with the family members that immediately say, "Que es este white shit? Que es este cosa de gringos?" that
Say
immediately,
say that
because
again.
yeah, what is this kind of white shit, or what is this cosa de gringos that you're talking about? Is those boundaries y todo eso? What is that stuff? That you deal with those family members, because I got a few cousins, I got a few uncles, I got a few great aunts that are just like, what the hell does that mean? Either you're
Yeah,
with your
yeah.
family or you're not. So
That's a great
yeah,
question.
yeah.
That's a great question. I don't talk to my extended family for the most part.
Mm,
Um, I am very much the black sheep in my family.
mm-hmm,
There's a lot of recent actually tragedies in my family that I just felt like and it was really funny. It was really funny. There was like a road trip that happened to New York City with my sister and my mom. They went out to see the extended family, and I mean, they came back running with like their tails between them. They were like, "No, it's so toxic," and
yeah,
I was like, "Yeah, that's why I don't talk to these people."
right, right, right,
You know what I mean?
absolutely,
Like, you have to
yeah,
protect yourself. That's that boundary situation.
yeah, yeah,
I'm not going to keep having the same conversation with you expecting a different result. That's literally the definition of being crazy.
yeah,
You keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Nah, I don't have
right,
time for that.
right, absolutely,
I love my family. I do. I love them con todo y tóxicos que son, because they really are. They're
right,
toxic. Um, I love them. There's a love there that it's never going to go away.
right, right,
One of my aunts that I like love the most is like, I'm named after her. She is woo. And I have to sort of say, I love you guys, but I'm going to love you guys from afar.
right,
I'm going to hope that you guys are in the world doing well. As for that close family, for me, it's really always been just me, my sister and my mom.
yeah,
And so with those relationships, I try.
right,
But the boundaries is always going to be a thing. I don't care if you think it's white people things. I don't
yeah,
care.
yeah,
No, it's a Rosa thing. I need
right,
this to be well and to interact with you.
right,
And if you can't do that basic thing that I ask you for, that's you tell because boundaries, when you bring up boundaries, I don't bring up boundaries with everybody.
right,
If I don't like you, I'm not going to talk about boundaries with you. I
right,
don't care. I don't
right,
care if you do it because I don't care about you, right?
right, right. Absolutely.
But with my mom, with my sister, I'm gonna bring up boundaries. Why? Because I care about them.
Right,
Because I
right,
want them in my life. With my
right.
extended family, I don't talk about this stuff with them. Why? Because
Mm-hmm,
I don't care. At the end of the day, it's like I love them.
mm-hmm,
I want them to do well, but I don't care if they're in my life.
mm-hmm,
And it is
mm-hmm.
coming from a place of love. I'm not
Right,
going to engage with this with you because I know it's just going to end up we're arguing.
right, right. Absolutely. And you bring up a very interesting topic because I think one of the big stereotypes of Latinidad, Latino culture that we see is the great big family. But I'm finding more and more as generations pass in the United States that we're finding that there's less extended families. I know for me, our lives were just my mom, my little
Yep.
brother. That was it. It was
Yep.
just the three of us, and those are the only things that matter in the world. The extended family can say, "Hold on," you know. But as you're seeing these kinds of shifts, are you seeing that we are becoming a little bit more like a nuclear family model, or is this something that is coming as a result of finally calling out and bringing up the concept of boundaries and cutting people out of our lives? I would love to know what your thoughts are, and if you feel like we need to see more stories that are less about the big, massive family and a little bit more about the kind of insulated, there's just the two of us, just the three of us kind of thing. Because I'm noticing it a lot with especially more recent plays. I think of Benjamin Benet's Alma, which is just a mother and daughter, and that's all that they got is just each other. I'd love to know your thoughts more on the kind of the feeling of shrinkage in Latino families all over the country.
I think there's a reckoning happening right now, and our generation is the one that's starting it. It's the
Hmm.
millennial generation that started it.
Right.
Um, And I think that movies that are coming out right now, and I'm not saying that these movies are perfect, but I'm saying that they're starting the conversation, and that's important. That's an important place to start. Movies like Encanto, Turning Red. I'm trying to think of I'm thinking of yeah, I think that there's just a lot of media right now coming out that's mirroring the experience of our generation and
Hmm.
about and that is presenting these ideas about saying, just because you're the matriarch of the family doesn't mean you get to treat me like this, right?
Right.
And so I think because of that, and because there's a lot more people in therapy. I do therapy, y'all. Please do therapy. Let me tell you, my life has changed when I started doing therapy. I think it's important, um, but also I do think that, especially with family treatment, right?
Hmm.
I can speak from my experience. My mom was a single mom. She raised me by herself,
Yeah.
me and my sister, and there's a lot of desprecio,
Mm.
putting down of single mothers
Yeah.
in Latino culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I saw it my whole I remember being the kid who was like, "Do we have to go over there because they treat you so badly?"
Hmm. Hmm.
And my mom did, and she continued to well into until we left New York City.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I knew I didn't want that for me.
Hmm.
Not that I am a single mother, but I didn't want somebody to look at my life with a magnifying glass and decide that what I was doing was bad, even though I wasn't doing anything bad, and treat me like that. Um, and I think it does. We saw the abuse that our parents went through.
Right.
We saw the abuse, and for them it's so funny because when you have those difficult conversations with your parents, a lot of times it's like, but you didn't like it when abuela did this to you, or you didn't like it when tia did this to you, right? And
Right.
a lot of our parents, they didn't necessarily like their parents,
Right.
but they felt obligated
Mm.
to keep
Mm.
them in their lives. And I
Yeah.
think for us, we're just having this like revolutionary thought of like, do we though? Like, do we have to keep doing this?
Right.
Should
Right.
we?
Hmm.
And I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think
Right.
we should always, I mean, in life and throughout the world, we should always question, should we continue to do this thing because it's what we've always done?
Hmm. Hmm.
The answer is oftentimes no. There's a better way. We just haven't thought of it.
Right. Right. Now, you talked a little bit about putting down from Latin families, especially, and I'm not sure if this is necessarily your experience because again, we're not a monolith. But
Yeah,
what is it like being a Latina pursuing the arts the way that you are pursuing it, and
yeah.
how do you navigate the kinds of conversations around money, Are you actually doing it? You know, cosas así that it's just like, are you really
Yeah.
an artist? Because I'll relate just to open it up a little. My family did not take me seriously as an artist until I got into one of the cultural institutions that they understood
Mm.
was a mark of, oh, you're an actual thing. Like when my play won the MetLife Nuestras Voces Latino Playwriting Award with Repertorio Español, my
Yeah.
grandparents understood Repertorio Español. That's where,
Right. Isn't
you
that
know,
so
it's
funny?
right, exactly. But until then, it was always, but are you making any money, papi? Are you doing any of these things? So,
Yeah.
what has it been like as a Latina maneuvering and navigating the arts, and what kind of conversations have come up with family members as a result?
So, like I said, when I started pursuing playwriting, I didn't really talk to my extended family at all. So
Right.
I don't know how they feel about it. No, I have had, when I had my reading at Repertorio Español, my
Ajá.
family, my extended family
Vinieron
they came
todos.
to see it. Yeah, they came to see it. They
Yep.
were like the only five people in the audience, but they came to see it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
they were into it. My tia, it was so funny because I have a tia Emily in this play that we
Uh-huh.
mentioned. She's never seen, and my tia Emily literally turned around and looked at me, and I felt so good because like those are the people I love, and that's why they made it into, like, you know what I mean? That was
Yeah.
really lovely. I was really lucky. My experience was not like everybody's experience. I think largely due to my mom, because my mom was a kid who like grew up. She was the artist who, they literally were like, "Oh, you're crazy." Like,
Yeah.
her mom wouldn't support her when she would sing. She wouldn't support, I remember my mom told me this story about when she immigrated to New York City in 1979. She was 21 years old, and she remembers looking out her window in Chelsea and seeing actors rehearsing on a rooftop. And she was like, "I want to do that." So my mom was always very weird because I had friends who like, I have actually one of my best friends who came to see the show in Texas. Charlie had a very different upbringing. He he was told, you can't go to school for theater. You have to be doctor, lawyer, engineer. That's it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's making money now. He went to Yale. He's doing
I
very
mean,
well for himself.
right.
But it's so funny because he's always like, oh, like this is where it's at for him.
Yeah.
And so I was really lucky because I think my mom wasn't thinking of it in terms of my kid making money. My mom was thinking
Right.
about it in terms of my kids having the opportunities that I didn't have. And she
Right.
wanted to be there. She wanted to do all that stuff.
Right.
So I was very lucky in that regard. Um, and my extended family, was really funny that my husband's family didn't really ever talk about my playwriting. And then when I got produced in Sarasota, then all of a sudden, wow, Rosa's a writer. And
Uh
they were
huh.
sending like then all of a sudden the conversation was like, oh, she's gonna be making and I'm like, oh, y'all don't even know. We are like playwrights, you can make a killing, you can't make a living.
Yeah. Yep. Oh my God, I know it. I know
Yeah.
it.
That's why I'm trying to get into TV writing, Frankie. So, give me the hookup.
Okay. We're working on it. We're working on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Send me a pilot. Send me a pilot. Let's see.
Exactly.
I'm in. No, but that is an interesting thing because that's very similar to my own experience. My mother always wanted to pursue the arts, but of course, circumstances wouldn't allow with two kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was very supportive of me being an artist. And it's really interesting to see how extended family took it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
That for me, I am not as in contact with extended family anymore. But
Yeah.
previously, when I was, it was always this. But are you making any money off of it, or how are you going to be able to start a family with that? How are you going to be able to do this? How are you going to be able to do that? The only people that really, and it's the funniest thing to me, the only people that I've ever actually showed any kind of like support outside of my mother were the incarcerated men of my life. They were just
Mm.
like, one of them straight up said, I prefer that you give me a theater degree than a warrant for your arrest. If I'm going to get a paper from you, I
Yeah,
prefer that one.
interesting.
And
Right?
so, yeah, it's like, okay, wow. But yeah, I know the moment that the production started happening, it's a mira que wow, look at you.
Wow. Now they're trying to get in good because they think I'm
Yeah.
rich. And I'm like, I'm
Uh
not
huh.
rich, I promise.
Oh, I have to remind people all the time. It's like, that thing, that big thing happened like 3 years ago. Where you think that money's gone?
Right, right.
It's like, come on, it's been spent already. But I think one of the other big questions that I think I have for you, and we'll be wrapping up here very shortly, is you just mentioned you can make a killing, you can't make a living. As an artist, and this is speaking purely from an artistic perspective, I know there's always the lens of Latinidad that comes with it. How have you managed to survive to reach that point of production? I know there are so many Latino playwrights, Latina playwrights, Latinx playwrights that are asking, when's it my turn? They're waiting years, they're waiting, in some cases, I know
Yeah.
some decades that ain't even seen a production yet. How have you survived? How do you keep yourself grounded, and how do you keep at the art? I would love to know.
So you're asking this question at a really interesting time of my life where I'm like, what comes next? I know certain truths about, and it's funny, I had a therapy session yesterday where I was like, I used to do human services and that I felt really burnt out with that, but I would write when I wasn't, when I had the bandwidth, because that's the thing is like there's a lot of jobs out there that take all of your bandwidth. And what I found is it took me a really long time to realize like I'm very introverted. It doesn't read. People think, "Oh, she's so outgoing, this and this." And that. No, I'm incredibly introverted. If I talk to people all day, that's not gonna end well for me. I'm gonna need to
Right,
recharge that battery.
right,
So figuring out those jobs that are not gonna take your whole bandwidth
right,
that you can do. I did leave my tech job. This was back in November, and it was a really lovely break, but I felt like I had to unlearn all of these like capitalistic expectations from me. I really felt worthless for the first like 6 months of that break, being like, oh wow, like I'm not bringing any money. And keep in mind, I've been working since I was 13 years old.
right,
Why? Why can't I
right,
take a 6 month break? Um, but tag like if you are in a relationship, making sure that you're taking those breaks, that you're feeling supported. My husband's an artist too, and I try to support. We take turns, we tag team it.
right,
The economy is not cooperating right now. um it's scary, where it's like before, what we could do on one income, I'm kind of like feeling like I'm gonna have to find something in the fall. I'm gonna have to find, even if it's a part-time, I'm gonna have to find something that's bringing something in. I know that it won't be the things that have taken my bandwidth in the past, the things that have taken my entire desire to write. You know what I mean?
right,
It's not easy. It's not easy, especially if you're a person of color, especially if you weren't born rich, especially like there's so many reasons, and that's why I think that this iteration of theater as we're experiencing has to die for us to move forward.
okay,
It has to die. The way that we do business, the way that we treat our artists, the way that we treat internships, things like that, it has to die because it's not sustainable, but for a very small percentage of white, well off artists,
right, right,
And the idea that you have to be in New York City or in LA to make it work has to die. Because what we're getting largely is stories that are very specific to the East Coast or the West Coast experience. There's
right,
a whole country in between there.
right, right,
And we're missing those stories because we're only listening to stories from artists toughing it out, working three jobs to try to make it in New York or in LA. And that's not sustainable. And you're not going to get art that is relevant when people are, first of all, on either coast, but also um, that are not like not writing from a point of desperation of like I have to make it. This has to be. I just think that we have to get out of that mindset of like grinding, grinding, grinding. You have to hustle. You have to hustle, or like get rich or die trying. So I'm trying to the work that I've been doing in the since I've been unemployed basically is like working on myself to realize that I don't have to be a cog in the machine to have value.
right,
And also working on my writing process and not thinking, oh, like, I have this play that I have 70 pages written of that I'm so excited about. I can't finish writing it for the life of me. I don't know what's wrong. Um, and I'm giving myself grace and opportunity to like rest. And it's hard. It's hard because you see, like, it's really hard to not compare yourself to other artists and see, oh, this person's getting this. And it's never jealousy. I never feel jealousy. I'm always like, oh, thank God. Okay, people are getting this. It always comes from a place of joy of like, but it's scary because you're like, oh, I don't have a play to submit. I don't have and I have to sort of retrain my brain to be like, that's okay, girl. That's your journey. This is the journey that you're on. And it's different from everyone else's. That comparison is where it'll get you.
yeah,
Never compare yourself to other people. It's not worth it. You're just going to end up feeling badly. And you don't even know. That's the thing is like, you don't even know. If everyone puts their problems in a pile in the middle, you will most likely take back your own problems. You think
Hmm.
other people have it better than you, but at the end of the day, you're going to want to take back your problem. I will take my problems over everybody else's problem any day of the week. But
I
I'm a
hear
work
that.
in progress.
I hear that. I hear that. And that is such a very, 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 very true thing there, though. To always be a work in progress, and to not allow yourself to get caught up in that whole comparison. Comparison is the thief of joy, they say. Comparison
It
will always
really
be the thief
is.
of joy. Yeah, and it's tough when you see other people achieving these things. It's like, I just got to even write a play. Gosh darn. Damn it. It is a very difficult thing to maneuver and to handle and to strike a balance on. So if you don't mind me asking, and I think we'll wrap it up thereafter. For you, as you are moving through and being that work in progress, as an artist, what do you want to see happen that would allow you to make better progress in that work in progress? What would you like to see coming from the greater theatrical community? What would you like to see change, or what would assist you best in getting to that place where you can be the change that you want to see in yourself?
Yeah. Um, I think that I've been really lucky. I know that you've worked with the folks over at Urbanite,
Mm-hmm.
and working. It's funny. We've had some places where we've touched the same people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And having people that just believe in your work and that are
Right.
willing to support that work
Mm-hmm.
is so important. Offering support to artists that need it, offering support for just writing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's something I'm trying to work on right now is just getting not necessarily a commission, but just like a grant to like write some of the stuff because then it would put my mind at ease. I could focus on the art versus, I think that the revolutionary aspect of it for me would be employing writers full time to
Right.
write so that it's sustainable for us, so that we're not just getting a little contract, a little money here, a little money here, and we're just,
Right.
we're trying to save that, we're trying to make it stretch.
Right.
A world in which we value, because art is incredibly valuable.
Right.
Art is incredibly valuable,
Mm-hmm.
and stories like the ones that we're telling are so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we don't put value on that as a society, and that's capitalism. That's
Right.
100% capitalism. That's because they want to be able to take our stories that are invaluable and put a very small price on it and say this is all I can pay you. Um,
Right.
and I think for theater, what that means is that the nonprofit model needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
We can no longer be beholden to boards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have to create art in a responsible, revolutionary way. And what that means for us as like, with doing our anti-racism work is that we have to make the revolution irresistible for people.
Right.
We have to make it accessible to everyone so that everyone has a place at the table. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing is I think I strove so hard when I first moved here and when I in my journey as an artist, I strove so hard for a place at the table
Right.
that I got so exhausted that I was like, like finally I'm just like I don't want to be at that table anymore.
Right.
I
Right.
want to be on my individual journey. And so
Right.
I don't interact a lot with that world, and that's for my own mental health. That's for my own,
Of course.
I don't want to be begging for a seat at anyone's table anymore. I don't want to be begging people to like me for who I am. There's plenty of people that will take me just as I am.
Right.
um and even with my writing being what it is and not being perfect, finding those people that believe in your work
Mm-hmm.
and being one of those people who believe in people's work, I think is so important in this day and age. When I had this interaction with a festival curator, and he was like, I was like, oh, I'm going to Texas next week for the world premiere of Curse of the Puerto Ricans. And he's like, I love that play. And I was like, you read it? And he was like, yeah, I read all of your work. I love all of your work. I love your voice as a writer. And I was like, who's paying you to say that? Like, why did you say it? And it's the thing is like, I think as artists, the reason we don't believe in ourselves so much is because I do think that there's not enough value put on our work, and finding that support system and realizing that it might not always come from your close friends and family. I think that's important. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm gonna be
No, no,
honest.
I no, you definitely did. You definitely did, and I think, I know I said last question, but I think this is actually one of the more important ones, especially as artists of color.
Yes.
The conversation around the crabs in a barrel, where you said that you and I have very similar journeys, and it is very true. You know,
Yeah.
Urbanites working has worked or is working with both of us. Bishop
Yeah.
Arts
Yeah.
is working or has worked with both of us, and
Right.
we're hitting all of the different programs that really support Latino work. But then it becomes this whole, oh, do we now have the seat at the table, or have you noticed? I think ultimately my question is, have you noticed that there's been a change from people and how they treat you as being a playwright that is now, I would say, on the verge. You know, you're doing some amazing things right now. You're on the verge
Thank you.
of greater, more national recognition. If you not have not already achieved it, you're in New York. You got one in Florida. You got one in Texas. You know, more is to come. I already know that for sure. So, do you feel as if the conversations are shifting around other Latinx artists, Latina artists that, in terms of where you are or how they perceive you, have you noticed any kind of difference or change? Uh,
I'm gonna. That's a really interesting question. No, because I don't interact with a lot of like actually like getting to go. I was at the Two Rivers festival, and I know you were at a
yes.
festival recently. Meeting with other playwrights for me is one of my favorite things in the world. I love meeting other playwrights because they get you. They're just as weird as you, and they get
Right.
you. They're just like, and I'm actually like an anomaly because I'm the talkative one. I love talking, and they're like, please stop talking to me. You are making me feel weird. But
Right.
I love meeting other playwrights. I strive really hard in my spiritual journey to not be somebody who's toxic or draining for other people.
Right.
And so I genuinely get happy when I see people get opportunities. I don't
Right.
feel threatened by that. And
Right.
I don't, because there's a saying that I live by. If it's not for me, no one is going to take it away from me.
Right. 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 Right.
Si no es para mí, nadie
Yeah.
me lo va a quitar.
Sí. Yeah. 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 My great grandmother would say something similar. Lo que es para uno y nadie lo puede quitar, is what she would always tell
Exactly.
me. Yeah.
And I live by that. I don't feel threatened by other artists. And honestly, I don't interact with them enough. This is very conscious
Yeah.
because I understand my mental health. I'm very, because you do when you interact with people a lot, you can notice they say it's like recently, like it's like a scientific term where it's like there's a moment where you tell people good news and you can see that they're like, or you tell them bad news and they're like,
Yep.
and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and I know we've all felt it.
Yeah.
So what I've done for myself is I've removed myself from the situations where I can feel that. Or when people feel like they're gonna, I don't know, like I also have difficulty talking to people about their plays. So I remove myself from that also because I don't ever want to make somebody feel like I don't like their play or like I feel like I'm entitled to. I don't think I can fix anyone's play for them.
Right.
That's genuinely a belief that I have. I try
Right.
to highlight the things that resonate with me and that, uh, I will tell you what made me lean in, what I wondered about, what I was curious about, what made my heart beat faster. So I try to approach it in a very positive way without being sort of like that level of toxic positivity. But what it does mean is that I do isolate myself a lot from the community, and that's just kind of something that I think a lot of playwrights need to do to move forward.
Right.
Just because when you start getting recognition, I mean, I think inevitably people are going to be like, oh, she doesn't even write that well, like she's not even a good writer, or she this or she that. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that I don't like that plenty of people like. Maybe I didn't write it for you, and that's
Right.
okay too.
Right.
And like just having that understanding that you don't need to be a blockbuster hit film to be worth loving and to be worth reading and to be worth engaging with. There's stories in between, the Doctor Stranges of the world, and and then the artsy indie film that nobody watches, right?
Right.
There's an in between place where you can have appeal to a group of people that might not be everybody, and
Right.
that's what I'm trying to aim to do right now. I actually
Right.
like artists like you. Like I admire your writing because I'm like, he's so poetic. I'm just like, I say whatever's on my mind. I'm just
Right.
like I see these like a lot of playwrights that they write in just such a poetic way, and I'm like, I love and I'm drawn to that writing, but I'm like, I'm not that, like I'm not that person. I'm never gonna
Right.
be that person. Um But yeah, it's one of those things where I think it's like respecting the qualities that you see in other people that you aspire to, but also realizing that it doesn't decrease your value as a person, you know? So
Absolutely, absolutely,
it's a
absolutely.
lot of
Well,
inner work, is what I'll
yeah,
say.
no, for sure, for sure. I completely hear you on that. I do. Well, I think we'll close out. Any last signal boosting you want to do? Come on, shamelessly advertise yourself. I know you just mentioned Two Rivers. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on in the life and times of Rosa Fernandez. What's going on? What last thing you got to
I
say? Yeah.
wish I had more stuff to plug. I mean,
Uh huh.
besides like, I mean, Curse of the Puerto Ricans, this is like years in the making. Like this
Mm-hmm.
feels like, I mean, we had to cancel the show back in 2020. So I'm just like, I think I'm just living in the moment right now and just being so grateful
Excellent. Excellent.
that
Mm-hmm.
I got to go, that I got to experience that it was just handled with such care and love. And there's so much community. I feel
Mm.
like I can call Texas a home now, which is beautiful. Um, I don't know what comes next. I'm really, really genuinely at a crossroads right now. Um, and I was really sad about it maybe like a few weeks ago, but going to Two Rivers and being a part of that festival and getting to meet fellow playwrights reinvigorated me. And I know you probably feel the same because you just recently came from a festival too. And then going to Texas and seeing people react to my play, seeing people, interact with it. The actors, I'm telling you, I was sitting there opening night. No, I think it was like the preview night. We went out to eat and everybody was talking about Curse of the Puerto Ricans. I was like, you guys can't talk about anything else? Jesus, there's so much stuff to talk about.
Right.
But like, how fucking, like, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but
Whatever.
how humbling
Yeah.
to sit at a table where your play resonated with people that they're talking about it in that way. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
just trying to focus on the journey. I don't know what comes next. I have no idea where I'm going to get produced, if I'm going to finish writing the play that I'm writing, if I'm starting a whole new one. And that's terrifying, but it's also equal parts exciting because we could go anywhere.
Yeah.
We could do anything from this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
that's where I'm at.
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry I
No.
don't have more exciting things to plug.
No, 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 not at all. I think to me that is the most exciting thing of all, though. I'll be very honest with you. When there's no roadmap, is when you can go anywhere. Just like you said, you can do anything. The dream is open to whatever may come. And the one thing that I am assured of, and the one thing that I do know for sure, is that mira, you're on the map. You know that estás haciendo cosas que other people spend years upon years upon years trying to do. And I know you've been at this a while. It's one of those things that things are finally bearing fruit. And I know that this is not the end. This is only a beginning, and that the unknown, it's going to light itself bit by bit, and there's something greater waiting. And I do want to express, and I think I speak for everyone in the Bishop Arts Theater family when I say that we consider you one of our own here, your family aquí, eres
That's so
familia,
sweet.
and you can always, the door is always open. We love your work. We really, really enjoy it. And to anyone that is out there listening in, Curse of the Puerto Ricans does run August 19th through the 27th. We have several more performances. We hope that you can come out to Bishop Arts Theater Center to see Rosa's remarkable, remarkable work, and to know that this is a playwright that is on the rise, and she's about to do some amazing, amazing things in this theatrical landscape. And we are just so honored to be part of this journey with you. We're just so honored to be able to share a moment in what I know is going to be an illustrious, wonderful career
Thank
in
you.
the theater. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for all that you've created. And I think we'll close it at that. Thank you again so very much.
Thank you, Frankie.
Yeah, and to anyone out there, we really appreciate you for listening in. And I don't know how to end these things, so y'all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And please come out to see Curse of the Puerto Ricans. This is such an amazing, amazing play. You do not